We're very fortunate to have a fantastic, I hope I didn't touch something, did I? Sorry, to have a fantastic keynote speaker with us today, Paolo Cironi from IBM, and Surya Kalluri from Bank of America will be doing the moderating. And basically, Paolo will be talking for 15, 20 minutes, then we'll have time for Q&A. And we hope to have you all back at the regular location about 10 minutes to 2. So let's welcome Surya Kalluri, who will then give a brief introduction for our speaker. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Olivia, and thank you for getting us out of the building for a small walk and working up our appetite. And I was also the asker of the first question, if you noticed today. So it's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, Paolo Cironi. Paolo is an elective member of the IBM Industry Academy. He's a FinTech thought leader, as you can tell from the picture up on top of the screen. He's also a published author. His most recent book that you can see up there in the image is FinTech Innovation, from robo-advisors to goals-based wealth management to gamification. And Paolo, I really like the gamification part of what you're going to be talking about. So he advises financial institutions on business models and digital banking. Many colleagues of mine know Paolo personally in your previous books, et cetera. And when I was reflecting on what Paolo is going to be talking about today and our discussion this morning, I particularly keyed in on the push versus pull discussion we were having, which is can you design a product and push it out? Or do you ask customers what they want and push it in? And you need to build a bridge between the two. And I think we're going to find Paolo's speech fascinating in that regard. So with that, please welcome Paolo.
Thank you very much. So as you see from that picture, I work at the crossroads of three things. The first one is quantitative finance. So my first work is on the probabilistic scenario optimization. That means the heuristic to learn using quant finance. The second is digital, FinTech innovation, because we are going to live in a digital world, so it's important to start from where the investors or consumers will be going forward. And the third one is value generation for investors, which is about behavioral science and regulation, because we need to understand how people make financial decisions and transform the industry using technology and quant finance to provide what? More knowledge to the people that need to make financial decisions. The core of this is the digitization of knowledge. It's not that important to optimize a portfolio. We discussed this morning that the asset allocation is commoditized. That's not the problem. What is important is to optimize the financial decision-making process of investors and people that need to save for retirement. So we're going to do three things today. That's me, the only time when I didn't have a beard. And so we are going to discuss three buzzwords that have been used and abused by the press, by the FinTech ecosystem, within the banking circles. The first one is disruption. Disruption is not important. What matters is sustaining innovation. The second one is digital. Digital is pull technology, but investors' psychology operate in a push economy. And the third one is platform. There's no value in single-minded solutions. We need to come up with a financial planning solution that basically embraces the whole financial life of individuals. So what about disruption? This is the City Disruption Report 2016 that forecasts that by 2025, 50% of jobs will be lost in financial services. Is this due because of technology? I don't really think so, not to that extent. I don't know what you had this morning for breakfast, but I was served the orange juice of the freshly squeezed margins. Because since the global financial crisis, the cost of capital has been raised by the central banks. Banks had to de-risk their portfolios. They started servicing high-yield clients, restricting to AAA, AA for the lending book, but that doesn't pay for the price for risk. So at the same time, the interest rate bottomed down, so there is no margin on the interest rate margin on the balance sheet. Banks thought of moving into fee-based businesses, which is payments that will be commoditized through digital payments, and wealth management. That means, for me, families, affluent, high net worth, ultra high net worth, investment products, and insurance products, which, however, are going through another process of disintermediation and simplification due to customer habits as well as regulation. So then, I like to blame some people that I met during my journey as IBM and as author on public speeches and private conversations. So the first one is Frédéric Oudéa, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Société Générale. We met in Paris 1 year ago. He said that, to his view, the banking system is transforming in the coming years in the Western world from transactions to services. That means to me making money by selling products which have embedded fees into packaging those products through a mechanism called advice that the clients are happy to pay for transparently. So then Sophia Merlot, the co-chief executive officer of BNP Paribas Wealth Management, she spoke after us. She said, we asked the French customers if they want to pay for advice. And they said, pas du tout. That means no way, I guess, right? But, she said, the regulators in Europe are forcing to do that because the ESMA declared in April last year that the MiFID II is there to change the business model of banks. Now, if we move to this side of the pond, I met with Larry Fink at the main stage of Morningstar in Chicago last year, and he said that he wants BlackRock to generate 30% of the revenues 5 years from now from solutions. That means pushing technology at the level of the relationship management process, and is a powerhouse of product making, is a huge product manufacturer. And there is a reason for that, which is part of the conversation today. So then, what is FinTech innovation? FinTech innovation is not, to me, the source of disruption, and you discussed this morning B2C versus B2B. FinTech innovation is the opportunity to help the industry to go through this transformation from transactions to services. It sits at the epicenter of 3 mega trends: technology, social behavior, and I like to mention regulation because I think we discussed this morning with Thomas, that said that regulation is, and to me, is an engine for innovation because it can create incentives to the industry people to transform because it changes the business model, the way the revenues will be generated. So now, what is innovation? I'm going to be very, very fast here for the sake of time, but innovation can be disruptive innovation or sustaining innovation. Think about Apple. 20 years ago, my father came home with a CD player. It was a piece of sustaining innovation. It cost me 1,000 of today's euros. And it was better than the tape recorder. And every year I bought a piece of innovation to create the hi-fi, the equalizer, the subwoofer, the loudspeaker. The last thing I bought were fiber optic cables to connect the architecture to get God knows what in terms of extra quality. So basically I saturated. And that is when Steve Jobs put the iTunes on the Mac and started selling the iPod. The iPod was not better music, but was whenever, wherever, everybody loved it, and it changed the music industry forever. But if you today go to an Apple store, you don't find the iPod anymore, it's vintage. You find the iPhone, products with a higher margin that helped Apple to make 250 billion cash in their coffers. So Apple found a way to move through disruption of a certain industry, rebrand, and achieve sustaining innovation, selling products with high margin. What is a robo-advisor? Is a robo-advisor better than a private banker? That's not the point. The point is that if through the global financial crisis we saturate ourselves, we don't understand the value proposition of banks anymore, someone might come and at some point investors decided to use simpler solutions irrespective of the fact that they bring more or less value to themselves. But to me, there's no win if we restrict yourself to the disruptive innovation piece. You need to find a way out of disruption. So what is a sustaining innovation for banks? I would like to look at a different company which is trying to achieve their journey starting from a complex status quo to a more complex status quo. And that could be Tesla. Because Tesla was not born like selling Fiat Pandas to the consumers, but selling amazing and expensive cars. But Tesla is based upon two things, which are core of the next part of the presentation. An engine, a new electric engine. Think about innovation in quant finance, the heuristic, the scenarios in order to map mental account and help people to learn. And analytics, that could be artificial intelligence, that helps you through what? Not just to learn about the client, but first and foremost, to help the client understand this new value proposition of advice because they have a harder time of getting it. So now, Robert Merton in Europe in 2010 said that the regulation will create a polarization of the industry. On the one side, commoditized solutions for everybody, could be passive investing, and on the other side, services that only the wealthy few can afford. Now, I think that it was right, but also wrong. Because FinTech innovation is there to help fill in the gap and making sure that we can create personalized personal finance solutions that augment the capability of bankers to talk to the respective customers. So that's why sustaining innovation is more important than disruptive innovation for financial institutions and our society. Which leads us to the second story, which is digital. People say, is digital? Is good? No, it's not. It depends. Because digital is pull technology, is demand-driven, while consumers or investors, because there's a difference between the psychology of the consumer and the psychology of investors, operate in a push economy. So it is true that there are people that want to sit on the couch and let their robo-advisor or their artificial intelligence powered solution do everything for them. But most of the people would like to talk to a coach. They need to get into a conversation, into a relationship. Now, the FinTech people say, well, but my user experience is so good that I'm going to win everybody because it's cool. Now I'm telling you, the user experience commoditizes very fast. It's like the Wi-Fi in a hotel. I was in Nice, by the way, last year for a conference. I didn't find the Wi-Fi in the hotel. The French are strange, but they have a beautiful landscape. But typically, those experiences commoditize very fast. Yes, some can now open a bank account in 5 minutes, not in 2 days. Soon, everybody will be able to do that. What matters is the engagement. So what we need to care of is making sure we can digitize an engagement. You remember this movie? I was seeing it with my mom 20 years ago. It was already vintage. So Leslie gets lost. He can stay with a new family, but he always comes back home. Not because the experience was better. He could have found a different family with more food, right, with a better weather, but because he was linked to his owner, to his friend. Now, I'm not saying it's easy for a client to see the bank or the financial advisor for retirement as his friend, and I'm not inviting you guys to treat clients like dogs, even though dogs are good to me, okay? But the point is that engagement is more important than experience in real life and also in digital. Why is that? As we said, because digital is pull, investing is push. To bring it back home, I give you an example. I live in Milan and I live in Frankfurt, families in Milan, right? Complicated. Every Saturday morning I fly to Milan, and my role in the family is to do the grocery. So I want to go very fast, okay? I don't want to waste time. Autopilot. I go to the local store and I start pulling the products off the shelf. My milk, my pasta, my Coca-Cola. And then I see an advertisement of George Clooney shampooing his beard, and I'm convinced to buy a different product, right? It's pushed to me. But I go typically with a purpose. Grocery is very important. We'll see why. Now, Olivia never told me, Paolo, let's take a look at what is going on Amazon. We go on Amazon with a purpose. We want to buy one of my books. And we find Olivia's books, which are much better. And we do that, right? They push at us. But we go on digital with a purpose. Very few people with money to invest, we start Googling if there is a UCTS compliant fund that compounds the return with an asset allocation that is 30% Canadian stocks and between 12 and 13 Shanghai institutions, right? It doesn't really happen. That's why the robo-advisors could grow, but not to the point they thought at the very beginning, or better, may start hiring robo-advisors, because there's a limit to the fact that people are pushed. They typically are not self-motivated to invest. This is part of what? Of the asymmetry of information. The asymmetry of information is what has generated the cost of the industry and basically makes the industry for investing to be an offer-driven industry, right? So consumers are price takers and not price makers. If you cut the price of the investment products by half, you don't find the queue of people in front of your bank in order to buy them. But if you do that with Ferrari, I'm going to queue up to see if I can afford at least a piece, right? A wheel of the car. So now, you remember this cartoon, South Park? If you don't, I will want to show you with you.
I got a $100 check from my grandma, and my dad said I need to put it in the bank so it can grow over the years.
Well, that's fantastic. A really smart decision, young man. We can put that check in a money market mutual fund. Then we'll reinvest the earnings into foreign currency accounts with compounding interest, and it's gone.
What's all gone?
The money in your account. It didn't do too well. It's gone.
What do you mean? I have $100.
Not anymore, you don't. Poof.
Well, what can I do to get back
I'm sorry, sir, but this line is for bank members only.
I just opened an account.
Do you have any money invested with this bank?
No, you just lost it all.
Then please stand aside for people who actually have money with us. Next, please.
So there's a double problem here. A regulation is to help financial institutions to behave properly, and financial education is important because the investors, the families, are not up to the point to understand the risk-reward relationship. So basically, they don't really know exactly what you're doing. So they entrust somebody through a conversation. So before the GFC, I was going to my bank saying, I got some money, what do I do? And they were saying, Paolo, we've got these New York-based funds investing on the height of the Burj Khalifa. And I was like, how tall is the Burj Khalifa? Is it taller than the CN Tower in Toronto? Yes, maybe no. Then I was thinking, well, no, this guy studied at Penn University, went to Wharton, he's smart, he knows what he's talking about. So he knows, therefore I trust him. So that is basically what happens. The Council of the Telemarket Regulator, and we participated to the same presentation, me and Anna Maria Lusardi, they asked the Italian consumers and investors what is the most important element for them to talk to an advisor. Above performance, they said trust, the fiduciary element. Now, trust is knowledge. That's why the real thing that banks should digitize when they start the digitization journey is not products, such as they honestly tried for the last 10 years, but is knowledge. Because if you transfer knowledge to people, you basically enable men to be more capable of facing the financial problem in their life. When I speak to bankers, I know that this is academia, so you might like the concept, but they tell me, oh, this is very theoretical, Paolo, okay? The digitization of knowledge, we don't see it in real life. So that is when I go to Hollywood. Now, Hollywood is not real life, but it really anticipates real life. So you remember this movie? It's The Wolf of Wall Street. I warn you, there are some bad words in this clip, okay? My Italian ears don't care, because they don't translate in the right way, so just close your ears for a little bit. So now, Leonardo DiCaprio is explaining to his colleagues how to sell penny stocks. Let's see what he says.
Sorry, I appreciate the call. I really have to give this some thought and talk to my wife about it. Can I call you back?
They don't know, right? They gotta think about it, they gotta talk to their fucking wives or the fucking tooth fairy. Point is, it doesn't matter what the fuck they say. The only real objection that they have is that they don't trust you guys. And why should they trust you? I mean, look at you, you're a bunch of fucking sleazy salesmen, right?
So then basically the two words that he used is, I don't know, knowledge, but he doesn't trust you, trust. That's why trust is knowledge. There could be a dark side of trust, a dark side of knowledge, a bright side of trust, a bright side of knowledge. Now, if this is so, it means that relationships are important. They are super important. And we heard this morning as well, the hybrid model, robo-advisors, the need of the human interaction, you know, the warmth of the personal conversation. Does it mean that we should not care about FinTech? We should not care about robo-advisors? Not really, because something is happening. Artificial intelligence is becoming more and more conversational. The moment artificial intelligence becomes conversational, digital will go from being pull technology into operating into push economy, and the circle is closed. Don't worry, there's time before that happens. It has to happen in consumption. But I want to take you through this reasoning with me, and then we go to the last section of this presentation, which is what happens in the world of e-commerce. So Amazon, Facebook, PayPal. The question is, do these people want to become banks? No, I don't think they want to become banks. I speak by my own, right? But they are forced to get into banking because of the competition in their ecosystem due to the fact that AI becomes conversational. See what happens. Facebook is a social media for you, but it's an advertisement machines for them. But typically, you don't buy on Facebook. You look at that, and then you go to Amazon, you click a link, you go somewhere else, you go to the store. But what is happening here is that people are less and less engaged. So Zuckerberg said before Cambridge Analytica that he has to change the algorithm to make it more relevant. It was a speech that he delivered 2 months ago. But at the same time, Amazon is bringing Alexa in the house of American families. It's not perfect yet. But they also bought Whole Foods. Why? Because if they hook people in doing their groceries they do every week through voice, voice is the new marketing. If voice is new marketing, who would you give the marketing budget in the future? To Facebook, which is passive, or to Amazon that talks to you, the last mile, so you go to Amazon, right? But now see what happens. Facebook, therefore, needs to get into payments. It's absolutely important, because in China, WeChat exploded, became gigantic, Alipay, because they added digital payments, because payments are engaging people beyond the experience. See it this way, US has the technology, Europe the regulation, and China the business model, right? You need to get the three of them together, but it's important to start from the business model to understand how to generate a new digital platform that aggregates investors. But now, if Facebook gets into payments, what happens to one of the biggest digital payment providers in the world, in the Western world, PayPal? Well, PayPal announced two things. In January, they said they will put Acorn, the robo-advisor, directly on their platform, so you can move from payment to investing directly. And they said a few weeks ago that they will do core banking. They announced, for example, a deal with Barclays for payments and so on and so forth. So since they need to stay relevant against Facebook, which will be bigger than them, they get into financial services. So that's very interesting. So this is really happening. The question is, will they be able to do that to digitize knowledge? Maybe yes, maybe not. But that means that it's a prime responsibility of banks and financial institutions to learn. They should not follow disruption. They need to find a way to digitize knowledge to stay relevant and to add value to their respective customers. And then we complete with the consular platform. This morning, we heard a few times people saying, well, the small fintech cannot break banks, right? And they're very right, because banks are already broken in the sense that they operate in silos. If I need to get payment, I go to the teller. If I need to invest, I go to the wealth manager. If I need to get a loan, I go to the risk manager, and so on and so forth. Now, the history of internet showed in the last 20 years that only platforms ultimately win. So there's value in bundling back all of these into a client-centric platform. So then just think about it. You see, Facebook is the platform for my personal life. LinkedIn is the platform for my professional life where we met. Amazon is the platform for my consumption. Twitter is the platform for my Trump paranoia. But where is the platform for my financial life? That is sustaining innovation. Effectively doesn't exist. So what does a platform for financial life looks like? Well, it's something that solves this equation, which is the personal financial equation that everybody has. I work for IBM, so I earn money, and I have to write books because I don't earn enough. Minus what I pay equals what I save. If I'm smart in saving, I can invest, I can lend and borrow, I can donate, I can retire, I can insure. Remember, all of those verbs are pillars of the FinTech revolution, so pay tech, wealth tech, credit tech. Wrong. They should be bundled all together. And they are business units of banks, right? Credit books, if you like, lending, retirement, insurance, so on and so forth. The problem with this equation is that although it's very simple, the money I have in my pocket is limited. So I need to make cunning financial decisions that typically go across these pillars. That's why I need to talk to somebody. And the last goals of this is retirement. But I cannot think of retirement if I don't solve all of the other problems through my life cycle. That's why it's so important to see that planning is more important than advice, even though it's a difficult equation to solve because the money I have is limited. If we go back to academia, 20 years ago, people were discussing the institutionalization of private banking, of asset liability management in private banking. That means, to me, using digital to resolve the financial equation in a hybrid model that augments the capability of the bankers to explain to the client and enables the consumers, therefore the investors, to understand how to relate with money through their life journey in this financial equation. Now, big data operates on the left of this equation. Think about PayPal. But the banking margins are on the right side of this equation. So the secret is to use big data to move from the left to the right side of the equation with artificial intelligence, not just to learn about the client, but to help the client understand the value proposition. And therefore to do what? Well, to get here, it is not important, if you think about behavioral science, to nudge individuals. Because when the crisis comes, the nudge will not be effective. The problem is how to digitize knowledge to make sure that at convenient prices we can help people to learn more how to relate with their finances. It's a matter of financial behavioral education. So if we learn how to digitize knowledge with AI that will turn digital from pool to pool or augment the relationship management piece, we'll be able to scale competence. And we said this morning, competence is more important than the asset allocation. Because we should not just optimize portfolios. The efficient frontier doesn't exist, but we need to optimize financial decision making. So I thank you for the invitation. I'm very honored for the chance that I had to speak with you, and I hope that we can continue in the afternoon with comfort after lunch. Thanks. Yes.
Thank you, Paulo. Very thought-provoking. When Paulo was talking, I was reminded of an institutional investor conference we were having at Merrill Lynch, where the topic was thematic investing, and one of the topics was virtual reality. And there was a booth with a VR presentation where the presentations were being done within the context of VR. So we were talking about environmental investing, and then you would be immersed in an environment where there's environmental stuff going on. Now, in that particular conference, it was a gimmick, but it's moved from the lab to an actual institutional investor conference. So I can see that going more and more, where not only in terms of financial decision making, but in terms of an experience, AI and VR come into our fold. So appreciate your remarks. So let's open it up to the tables for any questions you might have or observations. There's one over there.
If you would just remind us who you are also.
University, that was great, Grazie. I'm wondering, it seems to me though in the end people are really interested in outcomes and sort of what the bottom line is in terms of their asset growth rather than just knowledge per se. I'm wondering what you think.
Well, I would say that investors are greedy actually, so it goes this way. Clients pay the banker because they think they buy performance. It's not true. They don't buy performance, but honestly speaking, I think they think so. They've been educated like that. They buy risk. The bank doesn't tell them they buy risk. It's not crazy, right? But maybe the fiduciary standard, the regulation, or they're well-hearted. The problem is that even if the bank or the advisor tells them they buy risk, they don't want to believe because they have friends working for Goldman Sachs. They create these Burj Khalifa funds, right? So they have a hard time in understanding this engaging conversation. Now, the truth is, to me, is that which is a meta-truth, they buy neither risk nor return, but most of them buy the comfort of making a financial decision. The problem is that this is not conscious, it's subconscious. So how to bring the subconscious to become conscious? Well, I think that you need to go back to theory, so you look at the mental framework, so the mental accounts, and you decide that you need to apply a heuristic, basically scenario analysis, in order to help people to do what? To learn that they're not buying return. They might be buying risk, but in essence, they need to buy a substantiated and evidence-based decision for making financial investing. If this doesn't happen, digital will basically create financial exclusion, not financial inclusion into families, right? Because they will not basically be able to self-direct themselves. So that means to me, easier said than done, but this is the truth. And so if we can use technology to bring this to the surface, we help the clients, not just the banks, to come forth into the new value proposition. And it's very complex. That's why it's sustaining innovation. It's not disruptive innovation, right? I'm happy that you understood my Italian accent.
Paolo, I had a question for you. Earlier you had a slide up and you showed the three areas of major areas of change, and one of them was on the social piece of it. And I'm seeing in sort of the healthcare market space this emergence of psychosocial networks where patients are able to connect together, and they're seeing better positive results for various therapies because individual patients can share their common experiences, and it gets people to stay on the healthcare prescribed by their doctors better. Are you seeing anything like that starting to emerge in this financial space as well, that it allows people peer-to-peer, as you have up there, to network together and share those same commonalities?
Yes, this is happening. I mean, it's more obvious on e-commerce, when things go viral, and less obvious in finance because the psychology of the investor is different than the psychology of the consumer. But social media can generate herding to the point that we've never seen before, right? We see that Facebook can polarize opinions. So the same can be the moment opinions on finance circulate, they can polarize very fast. So that doesn't mean that peer-to-peer creates more information because it is intermediate banks. Because if the information is wrong, it doesn't go in the right direction. So it's a very, very delicate topic. It really works when you have simple products. Then you look at China, what happens, because they're selling mutual funds. It doesn't really matter the risk on the WeChat platform or through Baidu. In the Western world, I think it's more complicated because people have habits, they are framing, they see the bank in a certain way in their relationship with money, so they can be less easily disintermediated. But it is true that we entrust people through conversation on social media way more than before, and every day, every year, it gets more and more so. So it is super important that financial advisors learn how to play that game, maybe not individually, but institutions, because those platforms can be powerful, but can also be very dangerous because of the virality basically they can create and they can generate. Herding is part of life. But that goes, if you like, on my third work, which is the value generation for investors. I asked Yves Perrier, the CEO of Amundi, a couple of months ago. Amundi is 3 trillion of assets under management, which is the product or solution that justify the fees, right? And of course, we were discussing digital, selling funds on digital. And he said, look, it's the relationship. Okay, he's a product maker. He said advice and ongoing advice. Why that is important to me? Because if we manage to create a variety of advisor relationships which can scale and therefore use digital to augment the relationship, we said this morning, we might automatize the asset allocation, which is already commoditized, but we give more chance of creating gamma advice. What do? We create anti-fragility. But we use digital to enable the advisors to spend more time through the conversation. As the conversations are diverse, they should create anti-fragility to compensate the fact that the industry is moving towards passive investing, which is one size fits all, the same problem for everybody, right? There goes.
Paulo, I'll jump into the question. So you talked about engagement versus experience. And you put engagement above experience.
Yes.
But the point that I made earlier about virtual reality and the experiences that are being augmented. So where do you see the connection and the evolution of that bridge?
Okay, I think that the experience is very important. I'm not saying it's not, and we'll reach a level that we're not conceiving today. So it's not just using an app on the phone, right? But it goes beyond that. It's about visualizing also through a VR the risk-return relationship. The biggest problem that sets finance apart from consumption is the concept of time. Right, because when you buy something, you are happy immediately, and then if you don't like it, you can return it, right? So when I bought this suit, my wife said, "Paolo, blue is your color." I could just return it, right? Or I have a fight with my wife, and I decided to wear it when I'm abroad. But when you invest, you have to, you have pain, okay, at the beginning, because you need to ask your brother, your father, your mother, your sister, your financial advisor, and then you don't know if you will be happy today, tomorrow, the day after, because the financial markets go up and down. Now, technology could help you to visualize somehow the future or a portion of that to help people reduce the cognitive biases. So that is an experience which is important. However, it happens also that a lot of relationships are disintermediated and many people won't have time to go to an advisor to place the VRs and so forth. Now, the engagement is what? The engagement is what is at risk for banks because it starts from payment, and that's when you have to look at China. So if banks focus only on the experience on the app and they lose on the engagement, they will lose the client. So they will not be able to add more innovation. Those type of innovations are more expensive, right? So they require a different type of investment. That's why, again, they are sustaining innovation. They are not disruptive innovation because it's not cheap prices, small solutions. It's something that you're willing to pay for because it conveys your added value. But now, it's not the added value that we think. I say we because I was a banker once. I was head of risk management in banks, so I declare my sins. But it's the investors that understand the value proposition. So those are means to help them understand and rewire their brains. And that's why digital is powerful. Anne?
Yeah, and that's for JP Morgan. Sorry, thank you. Can you talk a little more about knowledge and empowering trust? Because it seems to me every time I start thinking about what that means and then linking that back to your visualization of outcomes, maybe or age or in this space, right? And we can go down a lot of rabbit holes about what the knowledge is that has to be transferred, or we could talk to Ana Maria and ask her what she thinks about financial literacy and what matters. But I do think we even struggle to define and understand what is the knowledge that is going to empower the consumer or the individual to generate that trust. Because I'm going to guess left to our own devices, we'll come up with all the cool stuff we think is important that may be irrelevant to the consumer.
I think the motto should not be digitized knowledge, but digitized behavioral knowledge to set it apart from normative knowledge. So here is not about what is a fund, what is a risk, right? What is a return? Here is about how do I relate with money? How do I link saving with investing, with insuring, with retiring? How do I accumulate? How do I accumulate, and so on and so forth? And that is why it's a matter of heuristic, so scenario analysis, which through digital can be visualized in order to, if you like, play within the mental account framework, which is for the good or for the bad, how consumers basically think about their money, but help them to break through by reducing these cognitive biases because they have a harder time of understanding the consequences and the relationships, right? So I can write a lot of documents in verbose legalese to explain the risk return, but the client will not understand that I'm only protecting the bank. But what if I could create a dry run? Again, the skin in the game is like you play and you lose. Now, Simtalab can do that. I can't do that because they don't have enough money. Most of the consumers can't. But if you find a mechanism to transfer some of this skin in the game knowledge to the families with a gamification exercise that invites them to feel the pain and the gain by virtualizing it. So I believe that we will help them to understand why they need to pay a financial advisor for a conversation, not just for the investment solution. So we start moving from transactions, which is the products or the portfolios, into services, which is where the real value is. And that's why I think that digital augments the work of financial advisors if we know how to use it. It does not replace. It changes the way they work, right? It does not replace. But we need to learn how to do that. The FinTech revolution did not get immediate into that direction. I've been spending a lot of time, and I think I'm having impact these days through IBM and literature in order to explain the difference between the two. And I see that now it is happening. A lot of the challenger banks, for example, they started creating agile solutions to digitize what products, but those products have no margin. And now they're thinking, maybe I need to become a trusted advisor or a partner for these small, medium enterprises. But as they did not conceive that the core of digitization was knowledge, they don't know how to scale the platform up. So now, AI is what might enable you to do that, but you need to conceive the architecture right from the very beginning. There's a question down there.
Going back to this question of trust and the role of regulation, I'm curious, the history recently, vis-a-vis Facebook, vis-a-vis technology, is that it has outstripped even technological companies' ability to think about ways to game the system. You have a circle there that talks about regulation, and what I'm wondering is to what extent you see governmental consensual attempts to establish trust regimes versus the kind of regimes that, for example, eBay and Amazon developed on their own to create merchant trust independent of a government mechanism.
Okay.
So what role do you see for regulation in this trend?
Yes, we heard this morning that regulation can be inefficient and sometimes not effective, but I'm a proponent of regulation because if the investor is not rational and the market is not efficient, fact. If the behavioral scientists say that you can learn more about the client psychology and you nudge them to do something, that will not be enough. What you always need is a regulatory framework to make sure that even those nudges are played in the right way, right? So regulation is super important because incentives are not always right. So now, the first tweeter of my FinTech innovation is the founder of a robo-advisor in Europe. And 2 years ago, put this tweet saying, this Paolo Cirone is a funny guy. He says that regulation is the engine of innovation. And I think it is the engine of innovation. You can see it in Europe. What type of innovation? Sustaining innovation. Because if the bank has to move from transactions to services, okay, it needs to transform the business model to earn money in a different way. Now, a bank always has the chance of doing what? Downsizing and aggregating, until it becomes a volume business and really needs to find a way to move into solutions, right? But if they understand that right, and they look at the spirit of regulation, they see that by transforming the business model, the cost of regulation, which is nonsensical, goes down. The problem is that as the financial institutions don't change the business model, the cost of regulation will always go up, right? So now in Europe, this year, there is a perfect storm. You've got 4 regulations. The MiFID II for customer protection, the PRIPS for transparency of the products, the GDPR for the data privacy, and the PSD2 for the open banking. Another lady that is the first buyer of the FinTech innovation in Singapore. She was studying at INSEAD, okay, another valuable institution. She made another tweet, okay, and then I met her saying, okay, if she's from Frankfurt, I live in Frankfurt. I said, when I'm in Frankfurt, I like to reward you with a coffee. Thank you for being, the first tweet of a physical buy, not the book. And she said, I work in Asia for banks, and I work in Europe. When I'm in Asia, I can do whatever I want discussing with them. They don't care about how we use the data. But in Germany, it's so complicated. In Germany, I don't see the buildings on Google Maps, okay, because people don't give permission, right? They are really, really obnoxious about privacy. And now I told her, if data is the new oil, if data is super important, individuals will not be able to protect themselves for the usage of data or insights, which is also a key element of IBM, security and privacy. So you need a regulation to help the industry, whatever industry, be in technology or banking, to learn how to use the data in a sustainable way, so that in the short term, you may be less successful. And I know it's very difficult in a capitalistic economy if you're less successful in the short term, right? Because investors might not understand. But that is where there is value in the medium to long term. And that's why it's so important to conceive regulation, but conceive it properly, because I understand that sometimes it's overwhelming. Anyway, if the business model changes, regulation simplifies. If the business model doesn't change, regulation gets more and more complex and sometimes nonsensical.
I think I'll do a quick time check. Do we have time for one more question, Olivia? Or one more question, if anybody.
Hi, Ben Taylor from Callan Associates. As you said, the data is the new oil, but when you listed some of those companies, Facebook, Amazon, others, there's also a saying that, if you can't identify what the product is, you're the product, right? And so when that's the case, you're talking about building regulation to engender trust. But there's an issue with that, which is that so much of the revenue is indirect, or it's related to data being the new oil. One wonders, particularly as well, since so many of those organizations exist because they're behavioral engines, as you say, they're pushing. How then do you generate trust when the nature of the best form of reinforcement is intermittent reinforcement, and you're using that data in a different fashion in ways that people don't understand? Isn't there a general risk in this industry of that sort of disruption being eventually something which is destroyed as a business model when people become more broadly aware of that, and then having a regulatory backlash at some point?
I think technology is not neutral because you can use it in one way or in another way, right? So there is a dark side of trust, which is generated in a wrong way, and there's the bright side of trust. So it's a matter of ethics and also, self-imposed ethics at the level of the industry. But that is inevitable, right? It's always been like that in our industry. That's why I'm a proponent of the institutionalist approach, which sees regulation as a key pillar of the framework to help smooth all these elements. Clearly, today, the financial system, the digital technology, the e-commerce industry grows so fast that it's very difficult to have regulation that map basically the transformation in the consumer behavior and in the propositions they receive. But that's why I think it is so important that on the legal side, the regulators as well help to revise the regulation completely, right? To get into new frameworks. Sometimes I'm thinking that the FinTech sandboxes are even more important to regulators than to the FinTech, because they need to start learning how to rebuild, right, regulation in a completely different way, to follow a process that goes too fast, right? And you can definitely stop it, but you need to find a way to, right, canalize it somewhere else. It's an open question, right? So, but I'm a believer that the system is capable of reaching a point where there is more value generated than somehow value destroyed. And that's why I'm advocating the financial institutions to see artificial intelligence not as artificial intelligence, but as augmented intelligence, where the center is the relationship, right, and the conversation among individuals. Because I think that is where most of the value is, and you create, the anti-fragility variety. If you don't do that, you don't make it right, it goes viral very fast, right? So it can be very damaging. So I'm a big proponent of these elements, and it is possible. It is possible. It's just about the incentives.
Great. So thank you for a great conversation. And before I turn it back to Olivia, please join me in thanking Paulo Serrano.
That
There you
was
go.
great. Thank you
very
so
much.
much. Before you go, I did want to give you a small token of our esteem. If you'd like us to mail it to you in Milan or Frankfurt or wherever you wish, let us know. But thank all of you, ladies and gentlemen, for participating in this. The last thing I wanted to say is I was really resonating to your comment about how to get individuals, investors, customers to break through, to understand what the objective is. And for those of you that haven't tried this before, there's a free app you can download called the Aging Booth. And if you haven't done it already, you can do it before the next session, or if you want to not get too depressed, do it in the evening with a drink. But the Aging Booth takes a photo of you and shows you what you'll look like in 20 or 30 years. And that's a really good way to think about saving for retirement. So let's join us in having a final round of applause for our speaker.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Diva. Really honored.
Impressed.